All right, there we go.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello.
Good morning.
What you will not see, because it's unnecessary, is the absolute atrocity of 90 seconds it took Aaron and I to get going on this
It's like a
recording.
it's like a tone deaf person clapping along to a fun song, just trying to
Clapping off, like off tone,
do
couldn't
it
speak.
this
like-
way.
So, hey, things are real. Things are raw, and they're not always pretty or perfect. So, which is actually a really good tie-in to what you and I want to talk about today. You know, just a reminder, our show, everything that you and I do here, one, it's our show, so we talk about what we want, which just feels good to even say.
Yep.
And two, it's a journey, right? Every conversation with guests and with each other are journeys of exploration in something, right? With the guests, it's exploring them. With each other, it's exploring a topic. So we don't have pre-scripted stuff. And I think that's a valuable thing to point to every once in a while, because so many shows are pre-scripted. We put in thought and preparation, but we don't script our conversation.
It's like a living journal a little bit.
It is.
It's like I'm reflecting on this.
It's an adventure.
Yeah.
Right? It's a conversational thought adventure. And that's why it's so fun to say, hey, welcome and thank you for joining us today on our journey. And, you know, one reminder, the show isn't free. So if you are inspired today, if you're encouraged today, if you're convicted or challenged today, please pay it forward. Share it.
Please.
Share it with others who you think could benefit from this adventure and conversation. So looking at today, you're talking about dealing with difficult things, right? And we're starting to see a lot of pushback on things that have become normal, right? Socially, politically, communally, across the spectrum. And one of the things you see too is like a critique of social media for, you know, causing depression and further isolation, because what does everyone post? Everyone posts these beautiful things, right? They post the best 2% of their life. And it creates this misbelief, this lie that their life is this gorgeous 2%, when there's 98% across the spectrum from crappy to great. And you know, that's an unfortunate thing. So today we're talking about the other 98%, really. Right?
And that's real. I don't think that people realize how much we do convince ourselves that people's lives are really that good all the time.
Yeah.
No one does a selfie during a fight. You know, no one or through really difficult, this is ugly stuff.
And there's, you know, we're talking about stewarding pain today. So let's just frame that in real hard and early, and then let's play with that for another minute. But we're talking about stewarding pain. And what do we mean by stewarding pain? What the heck is stewardship?
Can I just start with framing a bit?
Yeah.
So the other night, a lot of why we're talking about this, because you're going through right now. It's very, very real. Going through some loss right now. Family dog, loved, favorite family dog, just lost. 2 days ago, you call me, miss the call, see the text, call you, it's bad, show up at the house, and we're literally burying your family dog, right? It's not like a fun situation. It's like the only thing you do as a friend when you hear that happens is, I'll be right there. That's that's the only appropriate response. What do you do?
Well, and that's what you did. So, you know, dog got hit by a truck, you know, drag her in. I'm gonna give you a call, like, hey, if you can come help dig, that'd be great, right? You dropped everything, came. So that is a true testament of friendship, right? We talk a lot about who's willing to answer the call when needed, right?
And if it weren't for this podcast right now, or even whatever you want to share on social media, it's certainly not like this picture moment, like I'm going to frame by frame talk about this time I'm going through. No one does it. Although on some level, I wish people would, to go, hey, this is real. This is like, hey, this is a moment where I'm really dealing with this. This is shaping me in some way. This is going to shape my thoughts going forward. I'm not just always smiling all the time. Sometimes I'm weeping.
Yeah. There's been some weeping.
We did. Yeah. And so I wanted to bring it up because I should, I questioned even saying this to you. I mean, we're digging this hole, and it's like, this is an awful circumstance. And I don't know if it's nerves or anything. Maybe someone out there is like me, and they just make jokes when things are too serious or too thick. And I said, well, this isn't, I guess I guess I got you off Instagram, didn't I, John, for a minute, you know? And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell am I, why did I say that? That's like, maybe I should just say nothing and dig this hole and just get through this really difficult time. Your wife is there. You know, it's like, I'm trying to, I just feel, I feel the tension there. But I mean, you're walking through it in a healthy way, but it's hard.
Yeah.
But so then what is your response? I didn't know you did this. So I'm like, at least
Well, yeah, it's funny because you did.
It's not time to take a picture, is it, John?
You did hit a nerve. And like right now, I picture if you're building a rope, right? You have a lot of fibers, strands that get bound together to create a rope, right? And in our conversations, like I see 5 strands that I want to tie together to the rope,
right,
so that we can have a linear conversation. So there's a few pieces to that. So I'm going to try and bind this up real quick so we can continue forward in a unified fashion. And because we've talked about, like I said, 5 things in the last few minutes. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I'm thinking about is stewardship, right? Well, what is stewardship? Stewardship is the task or job or position of supervising or taking care of something. And there is a strong Christian connotation to the word, right? Mm-hmm. Where I think it's probably most widely used today. Mm-hmm. And that has an additional implication with the word, which would be to, it's a special responsibility to guard it, use it, and cultivate it wisely, mm-hmm. right? So the end is more in mind, and not being wasteful is a heavy implication. So I think if you look at it, regardless of your belief through those 2 contexts, it kind of gives this idea of like, okay, well, what does stewarding pain look like? It's because that's what we're talking about today, and I know we'll come to that a lot, but that's the central core thing. It's like, how do you cultivate, utilize, and guard what can come from pain wisely, right, to create something good?
Well, you were wise to identify it right away, you know, because what are we stewarding? Mm-hmm. It's like, your happiness? No, not right now.
No.
We're not doing that.
And it's interesting because I have to give a shout out and credit to my wife, Lindsay, because she's the one who's like, hey, there's all these things out there where it's talking about managing and stewarding money,
right,
marriage, relationships, business, resources. But there's no one who really talks about stewarding and managing pain with the end in mind to utilize these things wisely. And there's a lot that comes into that. And that's what you and I have been talking about the last few days, right? With the experience of us losing our favorite and best dog, you know, and needing to bury her.
The irony is I think you shared a podcast with me right before this happened about this very subject, about stewarding suffering.
Yeah, it's suffering, loss, grief, pain, right?
And it was like, in the moment, it was sort of like, man, that's really profound. And then you walk through it. Yep. Then it's way more profound.
Well, and that's something that's really fun, because I realized we're cultivating a way of life here and a mindset with the types of conversations you and I have and on this show. And what I realized walking through this is it has become so much a part of my thought. It's become a part of who I am. So even walking through, you know, a very ugly death, right? It wasn't a clean, like in your sleep type of thing, and digging the grave and all that stuff. I knew I would have had to have chosen a path of less resilience, because I knew what needed done. So I would have had to chosen not to do what needed done, which is such, I think, a cool outcome of the work we've been doing. So that's kind of the core thread here. And what we're wrapping around that, like the joking with social media and some of these other things, is like, hey, there's a lot of fake lies out there on what life's actually like. But the bottom line truth is bad things happen all the time for no reason whatsoever. There's no why behind it. There's no good. There's no silver lining. But we have the power, authority, and ability to choose how we respond, and we can create something good out of something terrible.
Agreed.
And that good that didn't exist and wasn't there, but we can find it, create it. Not even find it. We can freaking create it out of the ashes of loss, and that is an empowering, inspiring call. And you know, the social media thing. In every joke, there's a shred of truth, right? So like I hate social media despite my posting, but I use it.
That's why I poke you, because I know that about you.
It works. Freaking hate it. But I use it. I'm trying to use it as a tool for personal development.
Of course, yeah.
And encouragement for others. And I swear, if I didn't get messages of like thanks for some of the crap I put out there.
And you know what, I'll just give a shout out, John. Like in the midst of this tough conversation, I do think what you're posting is really fun. If you haven't checked out John's Instagram or Facebook, like the postings, they'll make you smile, they'll encourage you, they'll challenge you. I mean, they're really good. But I still have some fun with you because you're.
It's very fair.
Yeah,
I like being.
I got to. I'm just insecure. I don't do it as much as you, so therefore I gotta make fun of you, I guess.
So and there's a lot of dark jokes while we're digging that grave I wanted to do, but for my wife's heart, I didn't.
Right.
Because by the way, Arwen's a big dog. She's larger than Lindsay, my wife.
Yeah.
She's much larger. She's probably 20, 30 pounds larger than my wife.
Right.
So that grave was a large grave to dig. It took us a couple hours.
There was quite a bit of clay in that going on. We had a miner's pick and the whole thing, which was, I think, it was part of the healing process. Like, because I think we had other means to do that quicker.
Yeah.
And it was more like, and you said this too, it's like, I need to do this by hand. I need to really embrace it.
There's psychological benefit to giving yourself a physical means of letting go of something psychological.
Right.
And, there's a lot of data backing that, whether it's writing it and throwing it away, whether it's burying it, giving yourself that physical ceremony of intentional release is important. So digging the grave, burying Arwen, covering it up, taking the kids out. The kids, without prompting, without thought, they naturally wanted to like kind of pet the ground where she was buried to say farewell, right? Mm-hmm. And they, and we walked through that because I'm trying to raise men of courage and character, and that includes emotional intelligence and the ability to understand what they're experiencing. So we walked through those emotions.
Well, if you ever put a hand on a casket, it's the same kind of thing.
It's the same thing. It's goodbye.
Yeah.
We're physical beings, and that's why we tie back to physical fitness and all these other things. It's like we are not separate from our bodies.
Right.
And but you made this joke, and this is the final strand, and I think we've tied this rope together. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
As we're digging, you're like, yeah, no one posts a picture of someone digging, and like digging a grave, right? It's like always meant to be funny or beautiful. So I snapped some ugly, blurry picture of you digging real quick. We have like this tiny little lantern we're digging by, and I had zero interest in being on Instagram, right? Because there's a filter that I do apply for what I'll put out in the world, but that's not the glamorous versus the ugly. It's what is not for you, being outside of the inner circle, and what can be shared. And that evening was for the people who were present going through the loss. Right?
I think that's so funny. Ironic humor. No one takes a picture of someone digging a grave until now. Click. Yeah. Well, but I think what we're saying though, John, is that we don't want anybody to think that they're alone in this. Like it's not
that's it.
It's if you've ever gone through horrible pain and you think you're unique in it, or maybe you're going through right now, and it's hard to get out of bed. Mm-hmm. Like we have been there, and we don't know your exact circumstance. But I'll tell you, the feeling is not uncommon to man. We have that commonality is true. What is different about us is how we're going to handle it. And that's kind of what we're talking about today.
Well, we are, I think, as humans, are attracted to the genuine and the authentic, right? And we don't want some Ponzi how to get rich quick scheme for life. And
how to grieve loss in 5 easy steps and
it's not
6 weeks. That's not how that works.
It's raw and ugly, right?
Yeah.
Blood gets everywhere. There's terrible smells. Mm-hmm. There's terrible sounds. It's not fun. So when you made the joke, no one takes a picture of doing a grave, I was like, I have zero interest on being anywhere but here. But I just took the picture to post the next day because I knew it would be a helpful reminder as part of the story here, right? And this is one of the problems with grief and loss and ugly things like this and pain is it has you become defensive, right? Because you want to avoid further discomfort. And defensiveness often means isolation, right? You pull in, you put up the guards, you lock yourself away, and that is a very dangerous thing. There's times that works, right? You touch something that's hot, you burn yourself, pull your hand back. But for most things, pain can become a catalyst towards division and isolation, right? It can be an entering point into that journey away from a strong relationships that make you more resilient. And that's one of the reasons I took the picture when we made the joke is I want, if I'm going to spend the time putting stuff out there with what we're doing on the grit theory, right? We are fighting for and towards unity and strength.
Yeah.
So I was like, here's a great example of something that's not pretty. It sucks. It absolutely sucks. And by sharing it authentically and by taking the own freaking medicine that I've been sharing with everyone, that we've been sharing with everyone, I get to now, I have the opportunity to actually exemplify the things we talk about through an uncomfortable situation.
Agreed. I think one of the things that you said recently, because at the time of this airing, we're just days away from celebrating, is that the right word, but remembering the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and which for the first time in a long time, our whole nation wept together about something. We at least were unified, and this is a horrible thing that just happened to our nation. We lost something here, right? Now, how are we going to go forward?
Mm-hmm.
How are we going to grieve together? And you said that part of your grief process that you've noticed is that it's really potent right now, but it's like you need it to be potent because then you can repeat the potency. And you said that potency is lost in repetition. I thought it was a profound thing to say. I think though the prerequisite is potency. I mean, if you're repeating a lesser version or something that's like, this is what I can handle, eventually you're going to have to go back to the reality of how bad it was. And I went to the 9/11 museum a few months back, and it's like, you remember the steel beams that were made famous by, all the servicemen put their patches all over the steel beam, and it became sort of this iconic, place of remembrance and deep, deep grief of what was lost. And they have that there, and you're getting closer to it. It's like, museums are great. If they're done well, it makes it potent again. It makes it really real again, as if it just had happened. And it makes you feel the feelings again, which I think some would say, I want to get away from that. But we're saying, well, at some point you gotta press into it. And then that may take a counselor to help you walk through that, don't be reckless about it, but staring that thing right in the eyes and feeling that feeling, and then allowing that to stay for a while and deal with that is actually good.
Yeah, it is. And I think we're talking about two things here, right? I think you just brought up two ideas. The one is, let us not forget, right? And like with 9/11, what I hope we can remember, aside from the loss, is what that loss encouraged.
Yes.
That loss encouraged some pretty significant unification. Yes. Right? And it's like, okay, each time we remember the loss, let's remember what it produced in unification, right?
Yeah.
And greater respect and love for our neighbor,
Oh, yeah.
And that's the same with any loss, right? So like losing a dog is painful. But it's not lost on me, the gratitude that I have, that I am privileged enough to live a life that allows my family and I to deeply mourn the loss of a wonderful dog, right? I mean, we were talking about this earlier, but I think it's important because it's so easy to get stuck in our little vacuums. Like in North Korea today, kids are eating rats that they catch with their hands that are eating the deceased humans around them. That's a thing. The meat markets have undisclosed meat that's for sale. Everyone's starving. And the super cheap meat is allegedly often human flesh. There's the organ harvesting, right? There's human trafficking and stuff. So, and not just in North Korea, that spans most of the world. So, or large swaths of the world. So like you look at all those things and it's like, man, yeah, the fact that I live in such an existence where my dog has a significant place in our family as a guardian, a protector, a companion, and we can mourn that. It doesn't cheapen the loss, but definitely makes me appreciative of my circumstances through the loss. And I think it's valuable to take those types of things into perspective. Now, jumping from that, when we're looking at, you made the comment that when we're talking about repetition removes or
so potency
diminishes potency.
Yeah.
right? So it's like, well, think about it if you're training, or let's say you're a rider, right? The more you ride, the easier it can become to ride. The more you ride a bike, the easier it's to balance, right? At the first couple times you fall off, but you get to the point where you can balance much easier, right? You're repetitively trying something until the risk of falling is less, the potency, right, is less. Well, the same is true of trauma, pain, and loss, right? I think when your natural inclination is to pull away, you allow something to stay at its size and danger level. And it's like, I was even noticing, because there were some pretty, jarring, visible, audible, scent-related pieces to Arwen's death. And, from moving her and things like that are like very clearly in my memory. So it's like, okay, each time this little flash of thought comes into my mind of, those very visceral experiences, I have a choice. I can either choose to like try and change my mind real quick, or I can choose to walk through the discomfort and pain of that experience and think, how could I have responded better maybe? Or just to face it head on, detail for detail. And then after experiencing it, saying, okay, that was terrible. And then I choose to remember or think about something positive after, right? It's like, okay, I walked through it, deep breath, let it out, let's move on. And what I've realized is when I made that decision to say, yeah, that really sucked, and then to face it each time it flashes into my mind instead of just trying to change my thought, it loses its potency. It becomes less jarring.
Yeah, because we've like given it like a team in our head. It's like, is this a negative emotion or a positive emotion? It's just an emotion. It's like, don't put it in that box. Like, to think about this, it's like, oh, that's negative. It's like, no, it's real. It's like, think on it.
Yeah.
Like, how does that affect you? What do you, where does that take you, kind of thing? And because as you say, you can't ignoring it. It's not like this big monster that because you ignore it, it gets its feelings hurt and leaves your mind. It lingers and it stays strong. Sometimes gets bigger over time, bigger than it needs to.
Well, that which is unknown and ambiguous is frightening.
Right.
Right. And you've shared this idea a couple of times about how do you handle grief? You let it in, you let it last, you let it fade. And like,
I stole that. I want to just, like all knowledge, we steal it, right?
a natural Aaron thought, or an original Aaron thought. But the premise is true, and I think it's really, what's shocking is I think it's been true forever. Like, I can't think of a time when it wouldn't have been true.
Right.
But we live in a time where it's so countercultural, like with safe spaces and let us dare not have a negative emotion or response, or you're the enemy, and like that is very damaging. And I am sorry for the people who hold that mindset right now, right? And I hope that they can come to the place soon where they can begin to face the difficulties of life and gain some resilience, because life will destroy you.
Right.
And it's not my job to protect the naive
right.
who want to stay in that place.
Right.
So good luck. The thing that's interesting is when you look at something, right, that is terrible, and you face it head on, right? That's the like letting it in piece, right? By choosing to say, yep, that really sucked, and yeah, that was really jarring, and that was not fun, and that really hurts, and then like evaluate it, right? If you have to write it out, if you have to bury it, whatever the case is, like face that thing head on and accept the emotions. When we were talking with Kenya Clark, way back, he was talking about how he was just learning that there's no bad emotion.
Right.
It's just emotion.
Yeah.
And that's true. Like, knowing how to handle something doesn't make it less terrible. It just means you now have to choose not to handle it correctly to try and avoid the weight of the pain.
Like we feel guilty that we're managing it, as if we're being irreverent to how terrible it is.
Well, correct. And that's where I've honestly struggled a little bit with like Arwen's death, because like beyond the obvious reasons, because I've gotten a lot of well wishes and love, and I appreciate every ounce of support. But like, I've had to reject certain premises. Like, yeah, this is super traumatic for you. This is super this or that or this or that. And it's like, I don't own that. I don't claim that over my life. Like, yes, this is absolutely like heartbreaking, right? We are heartbroken. We're mourning the loss of something beautiful. And there were traumatic aspects of it, right? that, frankly, for Lindsay's sake, I won't just describe on the show, which I typically would, because she was primarily hers. And looking at those things, though, it's like, yeah, so all these things are tied together, but it's not going to damage me.
Yeah.
It was just a wound, and there'll be a scar, but it's not going to change negatively. I'm not going to have a limp from this,
Yeah, like it's as if somebody, and I'm sure this is not the intention of the person, but it could be as if someone's saying, well, it's clear you'll never walk again. It's like, well, not necessarily,
Yeah.
Like, yeah, this is really bad. You're right. Like, I don't diminish that, but trauma will be in looking back on, or trauma won't be known until you walk it out, because you're going to see in the future how bad it really was or whatever, but you're trying to diminish that. It's like, yeah, I do want to walk again. I don't want to stop here and feel totally paralyzed by this. I don't want to ignore it. I do know I do need to tend to this. I need to deal with it.
Yeah, because we don't need more baggage and weight to carry around.
Right.
So it's like, I know that this is not good. So we're going to face it as a family head on now. We're going to we're going to coach our children through healthier ways of management. We're going to walk through it as a couple. We're going to walk through it individually. Why? Because, like, to your point, then you could find yourself, and this is the problem, when you experience these things and you ignore them or you run from them, then that's where you have like all of this work to unravel, not just the event, but the second, third, and fourth order effect. And here's where I think the real evil of it is. I think there's a real lie tied up in this, and that is if you undergo something bad, and then you're comforted into thinking you can escape it and just need comfort, right? I'm finding the trail here. The idea that you need comfort over strength to work through it healthily is a lie that robs your agency and ability and capability. And that's where you see these safe spaces and stuff dropping up. We collectively as a society have lied to people to say, you're not strong enough.
Right.
You won't survive. You're not capable of handling what life is going to throw at you.
Let us help you, or why don't you just let it go? Because it's not something you can bear at all.
It's such a lie.
Yeah.
And that's really what I don't like about it all. It's like, okay, no, that's not true. You're capable of not only handling it, but becoming a stronger, more capable, more compassionate human being in spite of your difficulty.
I have a little plaque in my garage. It says, do not pray that things will become easier. Pray that men will become stronger.
Yeah.
And because it's back to the potency thing.
Yeah.
The repetition decreases potency, not because the potency is any less than it was in the beginning. It's because you've become stronger now.
Well, and that's what's been so weird about this week specifically, right? Walking through this as a family, it's like, oh my goodness, we've become so much stronger.
Yes.
With the mindsets we have. Like, it's an odd phenomenon, but walking through the loss, it's like, oh my goodness, like I would have to choose not to take the resilient approach here. And by resilient, I'm not saying I'm tough and I don't feel it. That's not it at all. What I'm saying is addressing it head on, grieving, working through it towards positive outcomes, and continuing forward despite the loss. That's resilience, right? So
Agreed.
It's like, because I just don't want the machismo idea out there. There's none of that in this.
And that's the 3-step we're talking about.
Yeah.
You let it in really fully, honestly. This sucks. And really get into that.
Yep.
Like, this is why it sucks. This is what I've lost. I'll never have this again. Man, I feel that.
Mm-hmm.
And then let it last where you're really chewing on that some more, as long as you need to, as long as you should. But the let it fade is really important, because if we let something define us, like, well, I had trauma and therefore I will always be this way. That is the unhealthy thing we're trying to avoid. We do not want it to last longer than it needs to. We don't want it to stay in a way that really messes up how we think going forward.
Yeah, I'm comfortable encouraging people to let it in, face it head on. I'm not entirely certain on how to articulate the idea of let it last and let it fade, because I don't want to encourage myself or anyone else to create a monster that they enjoy playing with.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Like, I really want, a month from now, this isn't going to be on my mind every day. Right?
No.
Because...
But it will visit, and that's okay.
Do you know what it is? I think it's the last two. I think all three are coupled. You let it in. You take the full shock of it as much as you can. You keep doing that. And as you do that, it's mini cycles. It's not one big cycle.
No.
But the mini cycles feed the big cycle. If I get an idea, right? Like right now, boom, just pictured us laying Arwen in the grave, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a terrible part of the night.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually a nice part of the night. But like if that mind comes into my mind, I'm like, yep, that's exactly right. Okay, there's nothing else here. It just jumped into my brain. Okay. I just let it in. I let it last. I thought through it. And then guess what? I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it fade.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you have to do it each time and incrementally, it removes the strength and potency that could be negative over time. And that's the best way I've parsed out to balance that, right? Because you don't want to become like... There's also a level of...
Yeah, it's not linear sequential by any means.
No.
It is sort of this parabolic going back to and getting a little further every time as you go up and down through those stages or pieces of it,
Yeah, and you made the great comments. Like, you don't want this to become part of your identity.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, like, there's definitely a matter of proportionality to loss, right?
Right.
Like, at the end of the day, Lindsay and I were talking about some of the things we were grateful for in what happened, right? One, I genuinely do not think she had a clue of what happened. Mm-hmm. She was chasing target whatever, and lights out. I mean, it was a very large tow truck. Thank goodness she would have totaled the car because how big she was. So, I mean, and they were going probably 60. So it was like, I was grateful that I didn't have to put her down, right? Like, because where I live, I would have had to put her down here. Mm-hmm. And that would have sucked. And she'd have been suffering. So, oh, cool, she didn't suffer. That's good. Something else, it wasn't one of her kids, right? Like, we're very strict. I do not think that the kids would ever be on that road, right? We've been very severe in just talking about it, like laying the foundation. But like, thank God it wasn't a kid that we're bearing, right? Thank God it's not my wife or a friend. So you start to go through these things, and it's like, wow, like it doesn't diminish the pain, but it puts it in its proper perspective. And I think there's a good distinction there. We need things to be in the proper perspective because it's like, yeah, I'll be a lot better after a week with Arwen than I would be with my wife. Mm-hmm. And that's fair and good. And like, we need to have, I think it's fair for us to have honest discussion so that we can properly, proportionately respond to things.
Yep.
Because if I think about even the safe room, right? It's like you say a freaking word, like a one-syllable word wrong, and like people will melt. And it's like, okay, that is, talking about proportionality, that is not something that should own that much investment from you. Like,
yeah. That's a taking stock, I think, as we're trying to get to as well. I mean, because we're talking about stewardship of the pain, the grief, the fear, the pain that can ensue during that circumstance. But I don't want anyone to suffer longer than they have, as if it's a badge of honor. Mm-hmm. Like, to talk about a loss as if it defines you and people, I think they make it like a noble pursuit. Like, because I've never allowed it to be less painful than it needs to be, that means I honor it more than you. It's like, I would question that. I would say, are you really grieving correctly? Because 9/11, for example, was horrible that day for everybody. Mm-hmm. Do I wake up every day feeling like that? No. Not because I revere it any different. Mm-hmm. It's because we went through a process together as friends and family. Now, hopefully you did. If you didn't, at some point you do. If you lose anything and you didn't deal with it, you will have to deal with it at some point. But if you did, it's okay to be like, yeah, it doesn't hurt me as much before. Now, something might bring it back. That's that cycle. Like, oh, man. You'll remember something. You'll see it. Like, for example, you might see a dog toy. You might see something, and that'll spark that. That's okay. Let it. It's like you're not going backwards. You're actually staying healthy when you feel those feelings.
And you bring up a great point, because like, if you get a cut and you have a scar, every time you see the scar,
it's as if it happened right away.
Yeah, and then eventually you'll see the scar and just be like, yeah, I don't want to be foolish with that knife again, right? So like,
Remember what that felt like?
and
Yeah.
you know, this is where this is a journey, right? We're exploring something here because it's not easily defined, but the concept of what we're talking about is complex, right? Because I just can't help but re-highlight proportionality of response to incident really matters, right? Like us losing our dog is not life-shattering, world-ending.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks. It's heartbreaking. I've wept. My wife weeps. The kids have sobbed. You know, like
we've all lost family pets. Like you know what that feels like.
So it sucks, but it's not life-shattering. It's not trajectory shifting. It's proportionally sucky and terrible, but it's not the end of the world, right? Like it's not what would be an absolute atrocity that would take a lot more support and effort and concern would be losing one of my family, like one of the people in this house, you know.
And what if you allowed this loss to make it so you're going to stay isolated now, and I'm never going to put myself out there again. I'm never going to get a pet again. I'm never going to, and it might be I'll never get married again. I'll never have a good friend again. Like we've all had those losses, and then you make this declaration based on the trauma, and then you never find health.
We have what you're talking about. We playfully called the a cocktail of despair.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
When you have what was it? Grief, loss, pain, fear starts to sink in.
Oh yeah.
And then because of the fear from the grief, loss, and pain, you get isolation and then division. Right. And that's the cocktail of despair. And it's interesting because even with the dogs, you know, I was talking with a friend last night, and he was talking about they were preparing for a wedding, and the stress of the wedding was causing discomfort, and the discomfort was causing division in the family who's preparing for the wedding, right? We've all seen that. And I was like, oh, well, relevant, unrelated situation of an opportunity to change the script towards unity and stronger relationships is what we just walked through with Arwen, right? When we separated from the neighbors and the gentleman who was kind enough to stop his truck and help kind of shield the road. It's a double-blind hill. It's dangerous. 55-mile-per-hour speed limit sucks. Not a huge fan of it. But he stopped, so they leave. And Lindsay and I come in the gate, and, you know, it's like kind of raw, voice more escalated and stuff. So I feel stung. So I retaliate. And then it's like, hey, wait, what are we doing? Oh, and then she falls out of the wheelbarrow. That was not fun. So it's like, okay. Lindsay goes inside. I pick the dog back up, put it back in the wheelbarrow so I can move her. I walk inside. We sit down, and we have a conversation about, hey, we have a choice right now. There's a lot of emotion going on. We can either allow ourselves to isolate in our pain, or we can right now make the statement and then move towards that statement to say that we're going to choose to push towards each other and have this be something that we work together on, despite not knowing what that looks like, to become closer.
Yeah.
And we made that choice, and the entire night changed, right? Not like, oh, the clouds part and sunshine butterflies, but it went from adversarial, we're both hurting, isolated, and angry, and therefore defensive, to vulnerable with each other, and we started mourning, and we started working through it together, and it changed the entire script, and it reminded me of like my buddy's observation with what he's going through with his family was that his concern is that they're taking the relationships of family for granted, that they'll always be there, therefore you can become less intentional and lazy with your speech because you don't think the person will go away. And he's like, that was a lie. It's so the encouragement in all of this is it's not silly to call out the simple truths that you take for granted on a normal day in unnormal circumstances.
Agreed.
To reset perspective, right? Lindsay and I work through life as a team.
Yep.
We needed to speak that into existence in a time that was jarring and out of what we were used to handling on a daily basis. And by reminding ourselves and then deciding to commit to that, it changed our trajectory for the night, for the next day, for today. It's been sub 48 hours, you know, but it changed the entire experience from something that was sowing division in our house, right? Separating us, causing us to become agitated with each other, to something of we don't know what to freaking do, so we're just going to grieve together and then move forward together. It was is powerful.
And you get all that. You get that gift because you guys are pressing in as a family. I mean, because the other could have been true. Like, you could have been totally like cognitive dissonance. Like, we never had a dog. Huh. What's that? What's that loose dirt over there, Dad? We don't talk about that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we all have that. All of us have something like that in our life. I mean, we're certainly being allegorical a bit here, and this is a little tongue in cheek. Like, do you have a grave that you just don't look at anymore?
You have to get back on the horse.
Or did you even bury it in the first place? You know? Is it just still out there?
Is it just rotting in
right
the back of your mind?
Yeah. Did you bury it in the first place? And if you did bury it, are you comfortable looking back at that painful thing?
Yeah.
And allowing the beauty to come out? Like, this is what I learned from it.
Well, and on the bury, I do want to clarify. I think we've been clear in this conversation.
Yeah.
But the burying it doesn't mean, because you hear, oh, just bury it, like go get it out of your sight and ignore it.
No.
We're talking about the intentional facing head on and intentional putting things in their proper place and release.
You did the work.
Yeah.
I mean, the burial is the work.
Yeah.
Like, you need to make the bed to put this thing where it belongs. It's a dead thing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it wasn't meaningful. It doesn't mean like it wasn't a beautiful thing and something that you enjoyed. It was a gift that you were given. But you also don't ignore that process that you went through.
Yeah. And it's fun it's interesting because when you look at all that, it does change the perspective. And I'm losing where I was going with this, but if you have something, jump in.
Your family. Well, I'm gonna say your family. What I was noticing here is that because your family, starting with you and Lindsay, and then to your kids, and I think it's important that you started with your spouse. Like, hey, what are we feeling here? How are we doing? Because she may have a different grief feeling than you did, or different avenues her mind's going. So it's like, let's check each other. Then once we're good, then we're gonna go to the kids, and they're gonna have, all of them are gonna have different ways they're dealing with it, different ages, different personality types, and then the good will start coming out of it. The health will start coming out of it.
Yeah, and Lindsay is much closer, so I think the grief is much stronger for her with this one. But there's also there's an appropriate time for things, right? We didn't wake the kids up and tell them.
Yeah, I thought that was wise. Yeah.
We didn't tell them first thing in the morning. We fed them breakfast and told them.
Yeah.
Right? Because I know that I am weaker. Like, I take things more harshly when I'm tired and when I'm hungry. So we had the dogs outside, which is very typical for us. So there was no reason. There's no hiding anything. We fed them a good breakfast. We had a good morning. And then it was like, hey, we need to have a family talk. And we didn't nibble on that sandwich. We just let them know. Last night, Aaron jumped the fence chasing something, was hit by a tow truck and killed. And she's buried in the backyard. And we can go say goodbye and walk through this together.
So you didn't get like the puppets out and try to...
No, I think that was close to verbatim.
Yeah, it's just straight.
Less than 10
Here's
seconds.
what it is. Yep.
Boom. And then I was silent because that's kind of a bombshell. And I let it kind of roll over the kids. And we, different responses from different personalities and
That's
emotions.
good. You didn't insert a narrative over it. That's good. It's
No.
like, hey, what are you thinking on that?
Here it is. And then also we gave freedom, right? Because one of them started crying. One of them didn't want to cry. So was holding back tears. So we just gave permission, like, hey, this is something worth crying over. If you have the inclination to, you're free to, right? It's not like, oh, I bumped my knee and I'm crying. Like, no, that's where you can toughen up. Here's where you can let it out. There's a difference, right? It's all proportional.
What a cool dad moment too.
Response.
That's a cool. That's like, you didn't say, we don't handle stuff like that. I mean, that's unhealthy, right? It's like, just suck it in, do this. Yeah. It's like, well, maybe that's what. If you're doing that, that's
I'm just
unhealthy.
uninterested.
Yeah.
I'm uninterested. Like some people would be like, oh, you're a beep, or, you're soft or whatever. It's like, well, don't mistake my willingness to encourage health in my children and my family for lack of willingness to bury you.
I think it's just the opposite. Right. Well, it went a different direction on that. That went the other way. I'm thinking more. I think it's way more courageous to deal with the soft or whatever you want to call it. I don't think that's soft at all. I think that's the brave thing. I think the weak man does not look at it. Honestly, looks away and goes, it didn't happen. We don't talk about that. Suck it up.
Well, I do think they're born from different perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Because if life is that, right? The people you love are dying around you. You don't have the ability to put food on the table. All these things that come happen. You're constantly responding. If you're in a place of survival where you constantly survive, you don't have the ability to begin to grieve or mourn or be healthy.
Right. This is the luxury you're talking about.
This is the luxury.
Yeah.
So that mindset was born from hard times.
Right.
It's not disproportional. It's not well suited for the luxury that we're living in, but it's fair. Like if you and I were leading our families nomadically right now, trying to survive, fleeing an enemy, right?
Right.
We don't have a lot of time to unpack the emotional exploration towards health and peace for a family.
Right. If my brother in arms takes a bullet while I'm in a firefight,
Yeah.
I don't get to go down on one knee.
And
I want to. That would be wonderful, but I can't right now.
And if you do, you die, he dies.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
and that's where it's like, because I just realized, it's like, these thoughts came from fair places, but are they appropriate and responsible now? And
Let's talk context.
and that's where it's like, once again, this isn't a lesson, this is an adventure, but it's like there's the time and place thing. And then there's also the fact that, like, if you've lived years of survival, it's going to be a difficult journey transitioning to thriving and to living well. You'll always have the muscle to go back to survival, but it's why waste your life acting as if you're surviving when you're thriving. And I think that's a good counterpoint. And the only other piece of temperance is, my father always says this, not always, sometimes it comes up. He's like, don't mistake my kindness for weakness. And there's this school of thought, Jordan Peterson speaks to it, and he's like, young men need to learn to learn and become monsters, not so that they're going and being destructive. And what he means by monsters, like, see the capability of your body, see how strong you are, see what you're capable of doing, good, bad, and different. Learn yourself. Because once you realize what you're capable of, then you have a reason to discipline yourself and control it. And it's like Bruce Lee was asked why, because he loved gardening. I think I have the right person. And he's like, why do you study how to fight when you always talk about peace and love gardening? I think it's Bruce Lee. I hope I'm not screwing it. If I am, please correct me so I can give the right person. But he's like, it's better to be a warrior in a garden at peace than a gardener in a war. And that's kind of the mentality we're coming back to here. It's like, yeah, you have to be strong. You have to be tough. You have to be able to do bad, terrible, hard things. But that doesn't mean you can't go into the garden and enjoy it when that's available to you.
You've created a muscle that you may need in the future for something that's even bigger. Who knows?
Yeah.
But because you've pressed in, you become something new.
So to kind of summarize what I feel like, and we'll see if it's all over the place when we listen to it. It feels all over the place in my mind, but to summarize it, we're talking today about stewarding pain. For what? To stop the lie that if you're hurting, if you're grieving, if you feel alone, that's where you need to be.
Right.
And to speak the truth that you can seek out community in your pain, and you can choose to face it, and you can choose to begin to heal through it and become better from it. And that's the truth that I believe in, and that's the opportunity I'm taking advantage of this week's mishaps and loss to try and exemplify in our journey.